Political disputation over this state's planning system has intensified over the last 5 years. It's brought back to the protest barricades the 1970s BLF Green Band's folk hero Jack Mundey, declared by the National Trust to be a living national treasure. Jack Mundey was arrested many times and dragged into police paddy wagons as the then Askin government attempted to evict tenants to make way for developer bulldozers. Jack Mundey's legacy for the people of New South Wales was the Rand government's heritage protection laws and the 1979 Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, which also established the Land and Environment Court. I spoke to Jack Mundey, now 80, a short time ago. Jack Mundey, welcome. You said a few years ago that New South Wales was as bad as the Askin years, if not worse. Do you really still think that?
Well, I think that Askin period would be very hard to equal, but I think this lot's doing a pretty good job. And their disregard for the spirit of what was achieved back in the 70s and 80s is a thing that worries me enormously.
What do you think's been going on?
I think that the developers have got so much power, their political sway with both of the main political parties, that I find it very difficult to believe there can be rapid changes, even if we get a new government, unless there's a change of culture.
Well, how do you achieve that change of culture? Because the developer dollar is very powerful, as you say, and corruption has been exposed at local government level, Wollongong in particular. There's a lot of other local government areas where corruption has been exposed, bribery, influence peddling. How do you get culture change at local government level, which is what you support?
I think that period that led to changes in the law came about because of extra parliamentary action. It was resident action groups and unions with a social conscience and environment groups and finally the National Trust coming all together that brought about the change, that extra parliamentary action. I think that sort of thing of eternal vigilance and more rank and file participation, more ordinary people in suburbia. So councils who had a lot of trouble were generally cleared out because of people's action. And I think we've got to go back to that grassroots movement.
Do you want to see a return to the original Environmental Planning and Assessment Act?
I think that would be vital. I think that ingredient is vital in the sense that it came about in the late 70s or 79 by Neville Wran, and he admitted himself that it hadn't been for the resident action groups and the unions and the green bands, that legislation wouldn't have been introduced. So it had its roots amongst ordinary people forcing the government to adopt a position after the Askin years. Remember that Askin was there for over a decade, in the late 60s and early 70s, when the building boom was going at its height and when so many of those historical buildings were being knocked down. And so it was that, there was a combination of people from the National Trust background and also unions concerned about people being kicked out.
Look, I noticed you've been supporting a lot of Greens. You're a member of the Greens Party. You were a member of the Communist Party. I'm told you were never a member of the Labor Party, so you've switched to the Greens.
I never went that far.
You switched to the Greens. But with all due respect to the Greens' democratic rights, Mr Mundey, they're not going to form executive government in 2 weeks' time. Have you spoken to Barry O'Farrell? Because in that documentary clip we've just shown, Mr O'Farrell acknowledges that the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act has been watered down.
Well, I think with climate change a certainty, I think that the Greens are going to be here for a long, long time, and more important, more and more decisive in the environment and
But the public's not ready to embrace the Greens as a major party. They'll get a high vote this election, but the polls seem to show that a lot of people who are traditional Labor supporters are just going to go straight over and vote for the Liberal Party because they want to get rid of the Labor government.
Well, I think that'll be a test. I think the more enlightened Liberals and the more enlightened Labor will seriously consider giving the Greens a vote.
You're just making a pitch for the Greens. You still haven't answered my question about shouldn't your best hope for restoration of the integrity of the planning system be in putting pressure on Barry O'Farrell?
Oh, very much so. And Australians for Sustainable Development are doing that in the Barangaroo issue. of trying to put more pressure on O'Farrell to come out and say what his position is. And I think that one of our most important issues will be to get O'Farrell to agree that the RAN elements of 1979 Act should be brought back in.
The other issue we've got, and you're a social equity campaigner, firstly, before you were a heritage protection campaigner, on the social equity front, we've got a housing unaffordability problem and an undersupply problem. As a consequence, rents are extortionate now. So how do you propose to help us solve that particular problem when we've got too much community empowerment, if you like, which blocks development, which we so desperately need?
But I do think that it's different areas. We don't want a situation where the wonderful suburb of Ku-ring-gai is being destroyed, but by the same token, there are many parts of the metropolitan area where there could be substantial medium density development. After all, and I've lived in a townhouse for 45 years, and so I think that there's a need for medium density development all around Sydney. And I take it the medium density development, together with the two main northwest and southwest lines, are the most important infrastructure issues on the agenda.
Well, Mr O'Farrell's offering that as far as public transport options are concerned, so you might be able to reconcile the Greens with the Libs in New South Wales.
That's right. Well, I think that Barry O'Farrell has to come out. I mean, he's been, after all, his electorate is Ku-ring-gai, and I believe I've got so many friends in Ku-ring-gai, wonderful environmentalists, and it's terrible what's happened to that suburb. In fact, I think it's one of the worst features of what's happened in New South Wales has happened in Ku-ring-gai.
Jack Mundey, thanks very much.
Thank you.